Namaste, welcome to the Atharva Forum. Today, we'll take a brief look into the 64 Angas of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. So, Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, you might have heard, is the ancient astronomy of India, where later developments are seen in the form of beginnings. For example, the later movement of planets, etc., are being investigated in their primitive form in this astronomy. And it has 64 Angas. That is the most important point that we will cover in this talk. Please subscribe to the Atharva Forum channel if you haven't already. On with the topic. So, there is an important shloka in the astronomical tradition in India. Apratyakszani shastrani vivadasteshu kevalam pratyaksham jyotisham shastram chandrarkau yatra sakshinau. It is an interesting shloka because generally the Shastras have become more about polemics, dialogues, etc. But is there a Shastram where you can unanimously agree on what is and what is not, how things work, etc.? So this shloka talks about that. It says, Apratyakszani shastrani. So, for example, if we take Vedanta, which is a very popular shastram, then the pramanams used, even though it is pratyaksham, anumanam, shabdaha, there is a lot of anubhava component that is involved, where you have to have an anubhuti to really understand what they say. And hence, you can see there are 10-15 different types of bhashyams for Vedanta Sutrani and so on. But the claim, at least in this shloka, is that pratyaksham jyotisham shastram. So, astronomy, astrology. By the word jyotisham or jyotisham, jyotish shastram, these words are used. What do we mean by them? So, nowadays it is popular to say that it is astrology, whereas that is not true. It is astronomy and a little bit of astrology, both combined. That is how it started. And later, the astronomy part ceased to progress in the last few centuries. And we are stuck with only the phalitam or portents, omens, etc. Forecasting and so on. But the shloka here, what it says is this, apratyakszani shastrani. So for the others, you will have to believe, you have to have faith, etc. Vivadasteshu kevalam. So there is always a fight. But pratyaksham jyotisham shastram chandrarkau yatra sakshinau. Chandraha suryaha. These two are known as eyes of Paramatma, two eyes of Paramatma. And they themselves are the sakshi for this Jyotisha shastram. Because they are the first two objects that give us time. One gives the year, the other gives the months. And later on, of course, we know Navagraha, etc. and 27 Nakshatras and so on. So if that is the case, then it should be completely unanimous. But is it true? No. We find hundreds of panchangas in our country, still people fighting amongst themselves about a particular date and so on. So without getting into that part of it, we will try to see where this all started and how it was thought about, why they started observing the sky, and what was the division that they came up with in the most ancient times, not the later times, but we may go a little bit before and after just to see a comparative way of looking at it. First, the Vedas. We know there are 4 Vedas, Shadangani. I won't go into them, but just to name the Shadangani, 6 Vedangas, Chandav Padau tu Vedasya, Hastau Kalpotha Pathyate, Jyotishamayanam Chakshur Niruktam Shrotram Uchyate, Shiksha Ghranam tu Vedasya Mukham Vyakaranam Smritam, Tasmat Sangam Adhityaiva Brahmaloke Mahiyate. So, what this says is, even though Vedangam doesn't mean the 6 form part of the Veda. Veda itself is of 4 types, or 3 types rather, Trayi, or 4 names, Rik, Sama, Yajus and Atharva. But when we come to Vedāṅgam, it doesn't mean that they are parts of the Veda, but they are 6 separate Shastras, which are definitely needed to understand the meaning of the Vedas. Without which the complete meaning as well as the Parayanam, etc. of Veda will be incomplete, will not be proper. So here, for example, Chandaha is one of the Vedāṅgam. It is considered to be the Pada of the Veda. And similarly, Kalpaha is considered to be the hands of the Veda. and so on. Jyotisham, as we can guess probably, is considered to be the chakshuhu, eyes of the Veda. Why is that true? Why is it simply that Jyotisham means Jyotihi, it comes from light, and then it means because light is associated with eyes? It doesn't seem to be only that much. It probably is that Veda is filled with references to different sky observations, etc. And you definitely need this as a fundamental knowledge to understand Samhita mantra meanings, as well as to determine when to do yajnas, etc. So, for example, what is the prayojanam? If that question is asked, then what is the answer given? Jyotisham is a Kala Nirnaya Shastram, Kala Nirnaya Shastram, or Kala Vidhana Shastram. Kala Vidhanam, you have to determine time, you have to fix time. Fix time for what? Fix time for both Vaidika karma as well as Laukika karma. So, according to one school, Vedas are important for Yajna karma. Of course, not everyone accepts that is the sole purpose of the Veda, but let us say that is one important part, Karma Kandam. For that, you have to have proper Kala Nirdhara, Kala Nirnaya, for which Jyotisham helps. So that is a main prayojanam that has been presented in various ancient as well as later Jyotisha granth. Now, let us come to the word Jyotisham itself again and see what it means. Jyotihi means light, and we know various lights we see in the sky, and basic is sun and moon, and then there are the nakshatras, navagrahaha. Then occasionally Dhumaketuhu can appear in the sky. Ulkapataha is also a form of Jyotihi or Agnihi. If we look at the old Shastras dedicated specifically to Jyotisham, not generic Shastras that talk about Jyotisham along with other things, what they say is that they first observe the sky and they talk about the natural phenomenon, both in the sky as well as atmospheric phenomenon. And also, they don't stop with that. They also talk about different conditions that can lead to different results. Basically, we call it as portents, omens, etc. When you see a particular formation in the sky, then something may happen on Earth. If some kind of wind blows from some particular direction, then something happens, etc. So these kinds of strictly astronomical observations, as well as the phalitam part of it. Phalitam means forecasting something, predicting something might happen to a particular region or to a group of people, etc. So both of these parts are very clearly there from most ancient times. So this is first thing to be understood. Now, why would they talk about an observation connected with something happening on Earth? And why would they record it? Now, if we think a little bit more on this, it looks like they really want to warn people further down the line. So, for example, let us say 1 week before Bhukampa, an earthquake, they have observed something, for example, a dust storm, and they have observed it twice or thrice in some region. Then we know obviously this Bhukampa, earthquakes create a lot of havoc, and like people die, so many people die. So what would they do? They would do what they can do in their power is to record this. Okay, if 1 week before this particular kind of scenario happens, then there is a possibility of a Bhukampa. The same thing appears to be true with all the sky phenomena. So it is almost like beginning of science, observational science, and trying to do a vyapti. Vyapti just means a correlation. If this is happening, then something might happen. And in most cases, you might be forewarned. So you would like to know what would happen so that you are prepared. So this seems to be the purpose. Apart from, of course, being extremely excited and interested to know what this group of stars, etc., are doing in the sky. Their movement is very peculiar. So obviously that kautukam, that enthusiasm and knowledge gathering was always there, but it was also more practical in nature. This we see all over the place, especially in ancient Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. For example, there is a Bhukampa Adhyaya. There is one more Adhyaya called Dakargalam. This Dakargalam is interesting. Even now, some people try to do this. It is water divination. So, how do you know where water is? So, they have recorded some interesting, I can't call it as trivia, but interesting leads, we can say. For example, there is a particular tree. If this tree occurs in a particular place, then 3 feet from it, in the northern side, 2 feet or 5 feet below the ground, you may find water. If there is a particular ant hill in a place, then nearby that there may be water, etc. So it looks like they were going after practical knowledge, and that knowledge which will be useful to most. Having said all of this, let us now think about who are the contributors. When we think of scientists, we always try to think of some Western scientists because of our education system. But our Rishis were first and foremost scientists. They really wanted to investigate Prakriti. Going back from something known to the unknown or less known, let us talk about Varaha-mihira. Varaha-mihira is quite famous for his Brihad Samhita, Brihad Jatakam, Brihad Yatra, etc. Pancha Siddhantika compilation. Now, leaving aside the other books, let us talk about Brihad Samhita. What is Brihad Samhita? Samhita means a collection. Brihad is a big collection. Does it mean that he has collected from something before that came before, or he himself composed some of it? It is a mixture of both. We find that for the great part of it, he has compiled from previous sources. And he also says that this Samhita itself is part of an entire Shastram, which is divided into 3 parts. And it is known as Triskandha. Trayaha Skandha, 3 skandhas. What is a skandha? Skandha can mean a branch of a tree, for example, or it can mean a part of something. In this case, part of a Shastra. And this word Triskandha is used in various different Shastras. It is used in Ayurveda also. It is used in Tantra Shastram. It is also used in Mahaprajna Paramita Shastram, in Bauddha Shastram, for example. But we won't go into all of them. But we will restrict ourselves to what are these 3 skandhas in Jyotisha Shastra. So, for example, if you look at the first chapter of Brihad Samhita, this is what he says. Varaha-mihira says this. Jyotish Shastram aneka bheda vishayam skandhatrayadhishtitam tat kartsnyopanayasya nama munibhis sankirtyate samhita. Skandhesmin ganitena ya grahagatis tantrabhidhanas tvasau horanyonga vinishchayascha kathitaha skandhas tritiyo. So there are 3 skandhas, and we should also remember that these 3 skandhas are the one that is very popular. So if you go and talk to someone and say Jyotisham consisted of 64 Angas, they will say you don't know anything. It is only about 3 skandhas we know. But yes, the 3 skandhas are a later development. So we will look at what they are very briefly and go to the earlier part of the parampara. So what are the 3 skandhas? One is Samhita. The other is Ganitam, also called as Siddhanta. The third one is called Hora. What are these? Samhita is a collection of knowledge. You could say, for the sake of understanding, that it is a collection of knowledge of portents, omens, and all kinds of natural sciences, what they observed essentially and recorded. Ganitam or Siddhantaha is the second skandha. What this means is essentially what we know of mathematical astronomy, starting from Aryabhata. Even before Aryabhata, there were Siddhantas. 18 Siddhantas are known, including Parashara, Garga, Siddhanta, Yavana Siddhanta, etc. But Aryabhatasya Siddhanta is most famous, and later on Brahmagupta, Bhaskara and other people came and they have their own Siddhantas, essentially meaning a set of principles and a theory formed based on them and observation, whereby you can calculate positions of planets, you can also predict eclipses through calculation. It's a proper science. And then the third skandha is Hora. Hora is what we would call as Jatakam. It is, you can fit astrology directly into Hora. And the word Hora itself comes from Greek word Hora, which has given rise to hour, H-O-U-R in English, which we call as Eka Ghanta in Sanskritam, etc. Some people try to explain this as Ahoratram, cutting off A and Tram from both ends and Hora remaining. this doesn't make any sense because no word is created like this in Sanskritam. So Hora is clearly an outside word, most likely a Greek word, but nonetheless it was adopted and we were fascinated by what this Hora is, and that is where you get all this Kundali, other kinds of predictions, etc. In summary, three skandhas are prominently there in later Jyotisha tradition. First is Samhita, second is Siddhantaha, third is Hora. Now, Siddhanta is not the topic of this introductory. Hora also we won't get into it. Now, Samhita is where you can see the older parampara being absorbed into the newer parampara of the three skandhas. Before going into that, one more small point. Later on, the three skandhas were also classified into five skandhas, etc. So there are five skandhas according to some late Vidwans, but we will stick to the three skandhas. Inside the three skandhas, Samhita will be our focus. What does Samhita mean? I told you it's a collection of various kinds of knowledge that people have accumulated over generations. So Samhita could be a layered text. If you have, for example, a Narada Samhita, Garga Samhita, Parashara Samhita, there are so many Samhitas like this, Agastya Samhita. It just means that Agastya and his Rishishyas or Shishya Parampara, whatever they have managed to compile and redact or sometimes update, that has been compiled into one particular book. So it could be a layer. This Samhita plays an important role in our understanding of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam because this is what has remained from the older tradition of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. Now let us go to Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. We have already seen that there are 6 Vedangas and Jyotiṣam is considered to be the eyes of the Veda. Now, does this Shastram start abruptly somewhere in between? Or does it have its roots in Veda? Like any other Shastram in our Parampara, Veda, including Samhita, Brahmanam, Aranyakam, Upanishad, etc., we do find the Bijam of Jyotisham in those Shastras, those texts itself. But do they collate it like a separate Shastram? That is not the case with Samhita or Brahmanam. So when time went on, people in the sense Rishis, who were scientists of ancient India, they thought that we should compile it in a particular way so that people can be trained in this Shastra. Now, who are these scientists? Who are the Rishis who are prominent here? In Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, we know about Parashara, Garga, then Garga's son Kroshtuki. Kroshtuki's name might not be very popular, but he is an important contributor to Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. And there are many other Rishis like Vasishta, Vriddha Vasishta, Shyamachandra, Vishwamitra, Narada, Asita Devala, then Lagadha. Lagada's book is also quite popular in the name of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, but we should remember that Vedāṅgajyotiṣam doesn't mean a particular book. It means a complete field, a Shastram, where there were several different books by several different Rishis and their Paramparas. Now, you might have heard of this name, Vriddha Vasishta. So there is one more Vriddha Parashara. There is also a Vriddha Garga. Now, who is Garga and who is Vriddha Garga? Who is Parashara? Who is Vriddha Parashara? Who is Vasishta? Vriddha Vasishta? Then Yavana Jatakam, Vriddha Yavana Jatak. So, Yavana, Vriddha Yavana. The naming convention here is like this simply. Just that there was a Garga, for example, and he talked about various Shastra points. Then after several centuries, there was another Garga. These are all common names. Gargya is also possible. Gotrasya Nama. So you can call someone by their Gotra name, etc. So assume that there is another Garga on the picture. Now, if you say that Garga, this Garga, how do you differentiate? You start calling the older person Vriddha Garga. He is a Vriddha. He is the older Garga. And this Garga would be called as just a Garga. Similarly, Vasishta, Parashara, all of them, many of them have this Vriddha and without Vriddha. So the older one would be with Vriddha and the newer one will not have the Vriddha prefix. So that is how we need to understand. Now, we have seen some names of people who have contributed to Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. Before going into the 64 Angas, what are some of the names of works or books that have been compiled and that we still possess, from which we know about the 64 Angas? One is Parashara Tantram. The manuscripts of this work have not survived. But the commentaries on Brihat Samhita by Utpala, etc., they quote from this Parashara's text. He calls it as Parashara Tantram in some cases, Parashara Siddhanta in some other cases, and so on. Vedāṅgajyotiṣam or Vedāṅga Samhita is one more text that has survived, but it is yet to be published fully. It is being sequentially published by a research center in Bengaluru. Then there is one work called Surya Chandra Prajnaptihi. It is supposedly a Jaina text. The Jaina nature of the text is clear, but for the most part, the contents of it have a lot in common with the general Vedāṅgajyotiṣam of the same period. It is in Prakrita Bhasha. So these are some of the main texts that talk about proper Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. But there are other texts like Shardula Karnavadanam, Atharva Veda Parishishtam, which talk about other things, but also about Vedanga in passing, sometimes more in detail. Then Natya Shastram, Mahabharatam, Artha Shastram, Tripitakam. All these texts have another purpose in mind, but we can learn more about what kinds of units were used during those times, what were the important tattvas of Jyotisham during those times. That is kind of learned from some of these other books also, which are not strictly about Jyotisham, but we do learn from the Prayoga. In this brief introduction, what I will do is, I will consider Parashara Tantram, Vedāṅgajyotiṣam and Brihat Samhita, which has compiled some of this older material. And with the help of some of these texts, these three mainly, talk about what were the 64 Angas and why are there 64 and why are they part of Jyotisham? Because strictly speaking, Jyotisham is something we would associate with astronomy or astrology, astronomy typically. But some of these other things included don't seem to fit there. But let us see why they have been put there. What is Parashara Tantram, Vedāṅgajyotiṣam and Surya Chandra Prajnapti before going into the 64 Angas? Very briefly, let us see. Parashara Tantram is a prose text. It is completely in prose and it is usually quoted as a Vyakhyanam, as part of the Vyakhyanam by Utpala Deva to Brihat Samhita. The whole text is not available to us, but whatever can be culled out of this Vyakhyanam or Bhashyam is Vedāṅgajyotiṣam or Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. Any of the names are possible. Vedāṅgajyotiṣam is a text that is still available with us. It is mostly in verse form, around 4,200 shlokas, Anushtup mostly, but there are shlokas which are in other Upajati, etc., Chandas also. And there are prose portions also in Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. If we count the number of aksharas, for example, they may come up to 700 to 720 Anushtup shlokas. So roughly it is around 5,000 shlokas, Vedāṅgajyotiṣa. Pretty big text actually. And Brihat Samhita is also quite big. The name itself is there, Brihat, and it is also 100 plus chapters. And it's a huge collection from various previous authors. So that is one. Now we will directly go into the 64 Angas. How are they structured? And who are the persons who discuss these things? If we take Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, what happens is Vedāṅga is primarily the person who answers questions. So the question answer format is quite popular. We know about it from the Upanishads and various other texts also. Even Surya Siddhanta, which could be a later text, talks about a conversation, someone going and asking something, and a Rishi replying, for which there will be another simpler question or avantara prashnaha, some other sub-question for which again they will answer. This is how Q&A format works in most of our ancient texts. Here also Vedāṅga is the main person. That is obviously why it is called as Vedāṅga Samhita. Mostly Kroshtuki, his son, asks questions. But there are certain sections where Vishwamitra asks Garga. So not always do they say Vedāṅgam papracha. Sometimes they will say Gargam or papracha. So someone goes and asks Garga or Vedāṅga, etc. It is very difficult to separate these portions, but let us see how it is usually done. But there are sections which is, for example, there is one section called Aditya Chara, which is a dialogue between Narada and Garga, not Kroshtuki and Garga. There is one section called Mahasalilam. These are all part of the 64. One Angam's name is Mahasalilam. That is a dialogue between Garga and Vishwamitra. There is one more Anga amongst the 64 called Adityachara, which is a dialogue between Narada and Garga. There is one more Angam out of the 64 called Vata Chakram, where Garga is not even in the picture. So it is a dialogue between a scientist called Shyama Chandraha, and there are 8 other people. Narada is also there, and there are 7 other kings who are the audience. They want to know something. That kind of setup is more like our Prashnopanishad, where 6 people go and ask Pippalada their questions according to their own level of development, and he answers all of them according to their own capacities, how much they can understand, etc. And one more interesting thing to note is opinions of different rishis on some topics are given in different places. For example, how many Dhumaketus are there? One rishi says there is only one Dhumaketu which comes again and again. But there are others who say there are 108 Dhumaketus. Someone says 101. Someone says no, there is only 26. Someone says we can't count. So this kind of very vigorous situation where people were discussing various things and questioning and opposing, trying to prove their point. This is also very much found in the ancient Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. Very unfortunate that we have lost this spirit now, and we should revive this. So if someone says Acharyena Uktam, that's it, we settle for it. That should not be the case. We find that is not the case in Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. And one more example, very prominent example, is they were trying to pin down the number of Ritu-s. I named a section called Mahasalilam. In this Mahasalilam, there is a sentence which says, how many Ritus are there? It is being answered, and this says, Garga says there are 6 Ritus. Then one more Rishi says, no, there are 12 Ritus. Someone says there are 24 Ritus. One Rishi, in fact, says there are 366 Ritus. 366 we know is the number of days in a particular year. How come he is saying every day is a Ritu? Maybe he sees a pattern like that. So these number fixing and in different cases, like how many Dhumaketus, how many Ritus. And there is also qualitative discussion. Why don't we see a particular Dhumaketu after some time? Someone gives one reason, the other person gives another reason. And how do we settle between when to fix an Amavasya and Purnima? There are so many of these discussions that occur in these within the 64 Angas, and they have been recorded. And we should look into how vibrant the scientific community was during that time. One more issue to tackle before getting into the 64 Angas is what were the pramanams used. Generally, we know about pratyaksham, anumanam, shabdaha. Pratyaksham is direct perception, 5 senses. Anumanam is inference. And you know something through perception, you know a correlation through which you observe only one part of it and you know or you infer the other part. That is anumanam. Shabdaha is something which you can't really know from pratyaksham, anumanam. That is the purpose. Maybe it also has things which you can know from pratyaksham and anumanam, but the purpose is to record something, events, etc., that has happened, say, 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. There is no way for you to infer something or directly observe it. It's a record, essentially. So that is Shabda. These 3 are known well in Vedanta tradition, yoga, etc., Yoga Shastram, Shad Darshanams. Not all Shad Darshanam people accept all the 3 Pramanas. That is all known. Here, what is the Pramanam? The Garga, if we take as a kind of embodiment of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, then he says this, Nahi sarvatra ganitam, nahi sarvatra darshanam. Darshanam ganitam chaiva yugapad yoga sadhakam. So what is ganitam, what is darshanam? Darshanam is direct observation. You just observe the sky very clearly. Ganitam is calculation. So you form some models, you try to calculate, predict where the Chandra will be 2.5 days from now. Because Chandra is not a very easy object in the sky. He moves fast, slow, he can go left and right, however, very, very difficult to track. But anyway, they definitely knew that some way of prediction should be possible. They tried to iterate and go on with developing the Ganitam, but it is still in a rudimentary stage. We see a very big development after Aryabhata in all of this Ganitam portion, which also forms one of the 3 skandhas as we have seen before. So, nahi sarvatra darshanam, nahi sarvatra ganitam. So, if you just keep on calculating without observing, what will happen? You may think your calculation works, but someone may go outside, observe the sky. Hey, you are saying this is where the Chandra is, but I am seeing he is in half a nakshatra before or later, etc. So then how do you refine your Ganitam or the mathematical techniques? So they go hand in hand. Nahi sarvatra darshanam. You can't see always. That is very obvious. First thing is you can't see during day. Whenever sun comes up, you cannot see anything literally. It washes out all the nakshatras, chandra, etc. So if some child is born during the daytime, how do you say where the Chandra is during that time? Obviously, you need Ganitam. But unless and until you keep on observing and refining your Ganitam doesn't give you a perfect answer. So, Vriddha Garga has arrived at this very, very important principle in Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. Today also it becomes very important for us. So, Shabda Pramanam, someone has said it, you observe, you didn't observe, you didn't observe, someone has said it, you just take it on face value. It should be completely avoided. You take that as an input, you think about it, you study the parampara, you yourself observe, you have your own anubhuti. This is applicable to most shastras, definitely applicable to the Jyotisha Shastra. So, nahi sarvatra ganitam, nahi sarvatra darshanam. Only Ganitam will not help, only Darshanam will not help, both have to go hand in hand. That is when you can clearly say, you can clearly determine the position of planets and based on that various other forecasting, etc. Let us now come to the 64 Angas. 64, the number. Is it important? We know 18 is important. We know 9 is important, Navaratnani. We know 7 is important. Sapta Parvataha, Sapta Nadyaha, Sapta Dvipaha, Sapta Rishayaha, etc. So there are many numbers which are extremely important in our tradition right from the time of Vedas. But 64, what do we know about 64? One is obviously I am here to tell you about the 64 Angas of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. But do we have 64 elsewhere? Before going to 64, let us also look at 8, 16, 32, 64, which are all sub-multiples. So 8, we know that 8 is important. Where is 8 important? Ashta Vasavaha, one case for example. 16, where is 16 important? Shodasha Kalaha. So Rama is for example said to have 16 gunas. Or he is also known as Shodasha Kala Purushaha. What is Shodasha Kala, 16 kalas? Chandra, moon is said to have 16 kalas. 16, in English it is called as a digit, which is not a very intuitive word. But 16 kalas are known for the moon. 32. What about 32? 32 Brahma Vidyas are popular. Then 32 Lakshanani of a Mahapurusha is also popular. Into 2 is 64. Before going to 64 Angani, we will try to see what other 64s are there. 64 Kalas are very prominent. But 64 Kalas is a kind of a curated list, so to speak. Because we do find that there are 72 Kalas list in different Jaina Granthaha. There is one place where they list 86 or 87 Kalas also. So 64 Kalas is not something that is set in stone. And even the number 64, if it is followed in different Granthas, the same 64 is not listed. In fact, you can take a look at the book 64 Kalas, which is around 100-year-old book. Very nice job he has done of listing different 64 Kalas and sometimes 72, 86 also. So 64 Kalas is quite famous. Then we also encounter the number 64 in 64 Yoginis. And one more 64 is interesting usage in ancient India. Now we have the carat system, right, to measure gold purity. Ancient India had Varna. Varna is the unit. So 16 Varnas used to be pure gold. You reduce little bit, 15 Varnas is a little bit some other metal is mixed. So that is what it is. But interesting part is the 16 Varnas are all divided into 4 each. So 16 Varna gold is the purest gold. 15.75 Varna is a little adulterated. 15.5 is slightly lesser. 15.25 is slightly lesser. 15 is lesser. So there is a gradation of 64 points. So you can have gold which is completely impure, 0, or very pure is 16, but the 16 is also divided, each point is divided into 4. There are 64 gradations, or granularity is 64. So there also 64. So for whatever reason, 64 was considered to be a Purna number. It looks like, at least. And then in Natya Shastram, Dasharupakam, etc., there are Pancha Sandhayaha, and put together, they have 64 Sandhyangani, etc. And there are 8 ashtakas, etc., and then 64 parts of Rig Veda, etc. So 64 seems to be very important. If we come to 64 Angas of Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, then what are they? Let us look at the list proper. I will take Vedāṅgajyotiṣam as an example, but some of these things are available in Parashara's text as well as Brihad Samhita. You can see lots of overlaps. So it starts with Samvatsara Nirdesha, then Anga Samuddesha, then Paribhasha. So these three occur more like an intro, but I think one or two of them should be also included for the number 64. Then 24 prominent Angani, which you can say Angani, the rest 40 could be Upangani, but the division is not always made. All of them can also be called as Angas, or 24 can be called as important Angas and 40 can be called as Upangas. But if we take into consideration the 24, what are they? Karma Gunaha, Chandramargaha, Trendu Samam, Rahucharaha, Brihaspaticharaha, Shukracharaha, Ketucharaha, Shanaishcharacharaha, Angarakacharaha, Budhacharaha, Adityacharaha. So as you can see, the first 11, whatever I read, they are extremely astronomical in nature, and the Navagraha Charaha also comes there. All of the Navagrahas are talked about. Apart from the initial one, Karma Gunaha, where they talk about the Muhurta, etc. We'll go a little bit into them a little later. Then Antara Chakram, Mriga Chakram, Vata Chakram, 4 chapters that are named as Chakrams. Then Vastu Vidya, Anga Vidya, Vayasa Vidya, 3 chapters named as Vidya. Swati Yogaha, Ashadha Yogaha, sometimes also called Ashadhi Yogaha, Rohini Yogaha. So 3 chapters called Yogaha. And you can also observe Swati, Ashada, Rohini, they are all Nakshatras. Not all 27 are listed, but only 3 seem to be special. Then Pravisham, Naishtikam, Pravisham, Salilam, 24. So 24th Angam is called as Salilam, also called as Mahasalilam. We'll also look into what it says. Then after 24, what are the Angas, sometimes also termed as Upangas? What are these Upangas? Graha-koshaha, Graha-samagamaha, Graha-pradakshinyam, Graha-vikriditam, Graha-shringatakam, Graha-puranam, Graha-pakaha, Yatra-lakshanam, Agni-varnaha, Sena-vyuhaha, Mayura-chitram, also called as Mayura-chitropanishad, Bhuvana-pushkaram, Balyupaharaha, Shanti-kalpaha, Rashtrotpata-lakshanam, Tula-koshaha, Yuga-puranam. This Yuga-puranam may not fit here. I will talk about it a little later. Sarvabhuta-rutam, Vastrachedaha, Brihaspati-puranam, Indra-dvajothanam. Then there is a list of Lakshanani. They want to talk about different creatures, etc. Aja-lakshanam, Kurma-lakshanam, Stri-lakshanam, Gaja-lakshanam, Go-lakshanam, Bhargava-samsthanam. It should have something to do with Venus. Garbha-samsthanam, Dakar-galam, water divination. Nirghataha, Bhumikampaha, Pariveshaha, Ulka-lakshanam, Parivesha-chakram, Ritu-svabhavaha, Sandhya-lakshanam. Again, there is Ulka-lakshanam, Nakshatra-purusha-koshaha. So there are 38 here. So 24 main Angas, then 38 are listed here. Probably 1 or 2 Angas are lost, because maintaining some of these big texts in the form of Talapatras or Bhurjapatram is becoming very difficult. So some of them might be added or some might be deleted. But we can still add Samvatsara Nirdesha, Anga Samuddesha, the first 3 introductory chapters. 2 of them could be included to make 64 Angas. What do these contain? Now I have read out 64 names, that is fine. But what do they talk about? Obviously, in this brief introduction, it isn't possible to talk about all the Angas. So let us see some of the Angas to see what kind of content they have. First is Samvatsara Nirdesha. So Samvatsara Nirdesha, what is Samvatsara? Samvatsara we know. Samvatsara means a year. So Samvatsara means a year. That is a well-known word in all Indian languages. What is Samvatsara or Samvatsarika? Person who knows Samvatsara. Samvatsara is a word which is a representation for year, time units, time determination, etc. So Samvatsara Nirdesha is about a person who knows the Samvatsara. So for example, Vedāṅgajyotiṣam starts like this. Athatas samvatsara nirdesham vyakhyāsyāmaha. Many of the old texts start like this. Even many chapters in Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, etc. also start like this. Athataha, whatever that content, vyakhyāsyāmaha, anuvyakhyāsyāmaha, etc. So this is interesting to see what kind of person should be a samvatsara or samvatsarika. Tatra samvatsaro nama, or first they say samvatsara, then someone who knows this samvatsara is called as samvatsara. Tatra samvatsaro nama surya chandramasoho graha-nakshatra taranam cha udayastamaya kalabhinirvartakam. So it talks about graha, nakshatrani, taraha, suryaha, chandraha, etc. Then also time units. Nimesha kshana kashtadi truti lava muhurta ahoratra paksha masa ritu ayana vishuvat. Ityevamadi pravrittasya bhuta bhavya bhavishyat kalabhinirvartakasya jarayuja andaja svedaja upapattikasya chaturvidhasya bhutagramasya Janma nidhana karma guna abhinirvartakasya shitoshna varsha anila abhidhanakasya sankhya yoga gata gantavyasya vetta. So all of this he must know. Then only he is called a samvatsarikaha. Nowadays we might call this person as a jyotishi. Even in ancient times they might have called this person as a jyotishi. But all kinds of beings, they need to live, and how they need to lead their life. What is the good time to do something, this thing or this particular activity, say sowing of a seed or harvest or going on a journey, etc. So many things. So we need to be clear here that this Jyotisha Shastram is not only about yajna or Vaidika karma. It is about Laukika karma also equally, probably more about Laukika karma. Because if we go and see what is talked about in Nakshatra karma gunaha, Tithi karma gunaha, all the activities or most of the activities seem to be day-to-day activities. Of course, Shantikam, Paushtikam, Yajna karma is also included. So, continuing on, Lakshana vidita samvatsara atita upasthita vartamaneshu artheshu adeshan adhikurute ityadhikaradapi samvatsaraha. So, you should have knowledge in all of this. Then only is considered to be a samvatsara. So, that is how the samvatsara nirdesha starts. So, Samvatsara Nirdesha is the first chapter in Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. Parashara Tantram, which is also Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, starts slightly differently. It is called Upanayana-adhyāyaha. Upanayanam is bringing someone close to the Guru and then preparing him for receiving the knowledge. So, we know the Upanayana Samskara now. Same. So, the Adhyaya is also called as Upanayana-adhyāya. Brihat Samhita also calls the first Adhyaya as Upanayana-adhyāya. So, someone goes, asks his Guru or Acharya a question. Oh, I don't know how this happens. For example, in Parashara Tantram, he says, Dvadasha suryaha stuyante eka eva drishyate. So we hear about 12 suns, but only one is seen. Are there 12 suns? And how is this whole Nakshatra Chakram going around? Who is rotating this Nakshatra Chakram? We would like to know all of this. So it starts with a question always. But here, the Shastra seems to have been introduced later on. One more chapter probably was included as an introduction just because it is a Shastram. And they start defining who is a Samvatsara. So two persons, Samvatsarika and Purohita, seems to have played a very important role in ancient India. They are the almost like right hand and left hand of the Raja. Of course, apart from Senapati, Amatya, etc. But these two were very, very important. Without Samvatsarika, the Raja should not even exist. In fact, you should not live in a village where a Samvatsarika doesn't exist. So these kinds of statements are found in Vedāṅgajyotiṣam. So this is the Samvatsara Nirdesha, where they talk about what is Jyotiṣam or Samvatsaraha. Samvatsara is a word that is generally indicative of the Jyotisha Shastram, Tattvani in Jyotisha Shastram. Then the person who knows all of this, who can guide the people, he is known as Samvatsarikaha or Jyotishi. Let us move to the next Anga, or in this case, I should say one of the three introductory Angas, which is the Anga Samuddesha. In fact, I read out the list of 64, right? Or 62. All this name, or at least most of these names, are listed in the Anga Samuddesha. Anga Samuddesha essentially means that we talk about the 64 Angas. The 64 Angas, what are the 64 Angas? Is the number 64 indicated? Yes, it is indicated within this only. For example, the Anga-Samuddesha is like this. Devarshi Shreshtham Asinam Ashrame Devadarshanam Vriddha-Gargam Rishi-Shreshtham Munibhif Parivaritam. So, Vriddha-Garga is in ashrama. He is surrounded by munis. Then Kroshtuki goes there and asks this question. Abhigamyopasangrihya vinayat samshitavrataha Kroshtukihi paripapracha prashnam lokahitaishaya. So he doesn't want to know only for himself. Lokahitaishaya, he wants to go and talk about these kinds of, this knowledge, essentially the 64 Angas, so that it is helpful for the people. Yavanshcha puranagnya atmajnana rahasyavid puranam jyotisham chapi grahanam charitarthavit. So he qualifies Vriddha Garga. He knows the movement of grahas, he knows the various jyotisha tattvani. Tad ichchamo vayam tvatto grahatantram suvistritam shrotum shrutavatam shrestha param kautuhalam hinaha. We want to hear all of that from you. You have so much knowledge, please tell us. Jyotisha jnanam utpannam kathametad anuttamam kenava purvatah proktam rishina daivatenava. How did it begin? Who developed this? Who did the first upadesha of this shastram? Kasmacha chatushashtyangam. So that is where this word comes. Kasmacha chatushashtyangam kalajnanam ihochyate. Why are these 64 called as kalajnanam together? Namataha cha anupurvya cha kanyanganyasya. What are the angas in this shastram? He asks this. Then later on the chapter goes on where Vriddha Garga enumerates the 64 angas. At least in the version that we have right now, all the names are not found. But further down the text, we can figure out what the 64 Angas are. If we go to Anga-Samuddesha, we come to this conclusion that there are 64. Then there is one more called Paribhasha later on, where this Paribhasha is nothing but a little bit more introductory elements before going into the 64 Angas. For want of time, I won't go into it. Let us go into the first Anga, called Karma Gunaha. Here there are 4 main items dealt with. Nakshatra Tithi Karma Gunaha, Karana Karma Gunaha, Muhurta Karma Gunaha. So 4 items. What is this Karma Gunaha? So Karma is activity, Guna is quality. Simple. Nakshatra Karma Guna. So is it talking about activities of Nakshatra and qualities of Nakshatra, or activities of human beings? So it is a kind of in between. It talks about different kinds of nakshatras, Mridu Nakshatram, Sthira Nakshatram, Daruna Nakshatram, etc. So the nakshatras themselves seem to have properties, classifications. So if someone is born in that nakshatra, or if I am trying to do an activity, today is Kritika, then I have to do, if I do activity in alliance with the qualities of Kritika, I will be successful, or the chances of success is more. So the nakshatras also seem to have qualities, and some of the activities we have also seem to have qualities. If they align, maybe you will have success. That is the idea behind the prediction. But someone born in a nakshatra will also take those qualities. And karma word here is about activities that you can perform in a particular nakshatra. So nakshatra karma gunaha by itself has 27 nakshatras listed. How does it work? Like this, for example, Kritikasu Agni sadhyani sarvakarmani sadhayet. That is how it starts. So Kritikasu, what is Kritika? Kritika is a prominent nakshatram that consists of 6 taras. If you go outside and observe it, it will be a little lighter compared to the other nakshatrani. But still, by focusing your attention on Rohini and Mrigashira, the next nakshatras, you can, in the side of your eye, for example, because that is how Kritika generally is seen. If you directly look at Kritika, sometimes you may not be able to see, or it will fade out. So you look at slightly a place away from it, and you can see Kritika's 6 nakshatras, 6 taras. The 6 tara together is known as a nakshatram. And it is known as Kritika because it is like this, a shape, which is like a knife. And Kartanam, Kartari or something like that, that is related to the word Kritika. And it consists of 6 taras. That is quite popular because Kartikeya was born, he has 6 heads. But Kritika has 6 taras is indicated in this. So that is an astronomical observation. But what else is indicated in this? What you should do? Agni sadhyani sarva karmani sadhayet. What is Agnisadhyani? For example, whatever firework is not crackers, but firework including smithy, for example, ironsmith, etc. Those kinds of things could be done or started whenever Kritika Nakshatram happens. What do you mean by Kritika Nakshatram is there today? Moon is stationed in Kritika Nakshatram. That is the meaning of it. So if today is Kritika Nakshatram, then you can do certain activities based on the qualities of Kritika and qualities of the action. Pītalohita vastram cha bhandani vividhani cha. Since it is interesting, Kritika has also an attached devata, that is Agni Devata. And Agni Devata is always yellow, reddish in color. And if we look at Agni Devata, we immediately remind ourselves of yellow, red, etc. And he says Pītalohita vastram. So yellow or red cloths can be stitched during this time. Not the same day, but you can start this process. And there are other granthas like Shardula Karnavadanam, which says very interesting things like you should sow seeds in Kritika Nakshatra, but you should sow seeds that lead to plants that give yellow flowers or red flowers. So it is very fascinating how they try to correlate the devata, the color, and the activities, etc. So I have given an example of Kritika only here because of lack of time. Similarly, Rohini, Mrigashira, etc. All the 27 nakshatras are listed in. And what is the property of this nakshatra? What kinds of activities could be done? That is the list here. Tithi Karma Gunaha, also same thing. There are 15 tithis during Krishna Paksha as well as Shukla Paksha. Then the names of the tithis are listed. Each tithi seems to have a property. What kinds of activities could be done during those? Muhurta Karma Guna, there are 30 muhurtas in a particular day. The name, they have all the 30 have separate names and they have properties. So what kinds of activities should be done in a particular muhurta during a day? That is all listed. Karanas are also somewhat like that. So this is the karma guna, which is the first anga. Then a set of angas I had read out before. Those deal with grahacharaha, movements of all the grahas. In this case, graha cannot be actually equated with planet because they are slightly different. But the navagrahas are quite popular. What are the grahas? So Rahu Charaha, Chandramargaha, Aditya Charaha, Mangala Charaha, Angaraka Charaha, etc. Mangala is only Angaraka. There are all the 9 grahas, their charas are described, and some of them are very elaborate also. Angaraka Chara, for example, has around 52 shlokas, whereas more than 100 shlokas, 150 shlokas are available in Shukra Charaha, movement of Venus. What do these kinds of chapters have? I would like to explain with one example, which is Angaraka Chara, movement of Mars. Mars has a Vakra movement, which is, it goes like this. Suddenly it can make a turn and go. As observed from Earth, it is called retrograde nowadays. But why is this chapter important, or why is any of this Grahachara important? It is a proper science that they have documented there. In the case of Angaraka Chara, what they do is they divide the entire circle where Angaraka moves, which is ecliptic, into 3 margas, and each marga is divided into 3 vithis. Essentially, the ecliptic band where the grahas move, most of the grahas move, and Surya Chandra also move, is divided into 9 different regions, and each region is either assigned 2, 3, or 4 nakshatras also, because the nakshatras also form in the are residing in the band, same band. And in the case of Angaraka, they have observed for several decades, most likely, and they give different kinds of vakragatis, different kinds of invisibility periods. So the graha is not always visible. It is visible for several months and goes invisible for 2 months. And again, after 3 months, it can rise. In some of the cycles, it can rise after 4 months. In some cycles, it can rise after 7 months, and etc. So the invisibility periods can be of 5 different types according to Vriddha Garga. And similarly, there are 5 different kinds of retrograde motion. So there are numbers, distinct numbers that are recorded for the first time in Indian history of science in this text. Then the same thing is copied into other later Puranas and then collections, etc. With this, we can get an idea of the way they observed and what was important to them. And if he is going on a Vakragati, then what is the Phalam? That is also included. It is not only about astronomy, then there are some predictions also. Similarly, different Vithis, Margas, 9 regions are enumerated for Venus also and how he moves. Shukra's movement is slightly different. Chandra is also very, very crucial to so much of Panchangam. In fact, the word Panchangam itself evolved later. There are mostly 4 Angams only during this ancient time period. So Chandra, as he is a very tough object to track, they talk about his conjunction with various nakshatras, the different kinds of colors that he may have. In fact, there is a latest picture that is being forwarded, quite popular in the internet, which talks about 48 or so colors of the moon that was recorded in a particular decade. So the moon can have so many colors. So moon's movement, Rahu Charitam, Rahu is not a planet, it is just a proxy for eclipse knowledge, whatever they had. It is also a little detailed. These are the kinds of things that are being talked about in Grahachara, various Grahachara. Some of them are quite detailed. If we consider that set, and the next set is again with respect to the Jyotisha Angani, it is the Chakram, Vidya, etc. So before going to that, I would like to just briefly go over what is Aditya Charaha. Aditya is also one of the grahas. So Aditya Chara is important. But why is Aditya Chara important? Aditya Chara is important because the seasons associated with Aditya, where, for example, there is Shishira Ritu. There are 6 Ritus well known. Shishira, Vasanta, Grishma, Varsha, Sharad, Hemanta. In this case, Shishira Ritu, if there is an indication that Surya rises in a particular nakshatra during Shishira Ritu, then there is a possibility of dating this text. I haven't really gone into the date of some of these texts, but with internal dates, it has been estimated that somewhere around 3,500 years before present to 2,500 years before present. Around that 1,000 years is where these texts were compiled, most likely. So 1%, obviously, 1% didn't compile it. He, as well as his Shishya Parampara, kind of updated it. This is, how do we know this? From internal dating, not from any other external sources. So Aditya Chara is one where they talk about where the sun rises during a Ritu. For example, this is how it is. Shravishtadini Chatvari Paushnardhancha Divakaraha Vardhayan sa rasastiktam masau tapati shaishire. Shishira Ritu is a nakshatram from Shravishtadi to Paushnardham. Paushna is Revati. So half of Revati. Till this 4.5 nakshatras, he resides during Shishira Ritu. Due to precession of equinoxes, that phenomenon, we can date this text to go up to 3,300, 3,500 years ago. And around for 800 years later after that also, there are some updates. How do we know that? Because there is one more section in the Upanga, which is called Ritu-Swabhava, again talking about Ritu, when sun is in what Ritu, but that gives a different date. It doesn't match with this, which is exactly the reason I say that it could be, and most likely it is, a layered text. So we do have a snapshot where it goes up to 1,300 before Shaka, which is before the Common Era, up to 500, which is 800 years later than the starting point. So 2 different snapshots we get from 2 different Angas from internal dating itself. So that is how we know that could be the period. In fact, that is why the Aditya Chara also becomes quite important. Then going on to some of the other Angas, the Antara Chakra, Shvachakra, Vata Chakra are more to do with forecasting and prediction. What is Antara Chakram, for example? Similar things occur with Shvachakram, Vata Chakram. Rishir Antara Chakrantu Shukram Papracha Naradaha. This is interesting. So Narada goes and asks about what is this Antara Chakram? Then he says, Jignasus Tattvavid Shastram Vividham Nriphalodayam. Iti Prishtassa Bhagavan Sarvagno Munisattamaha Tasmai Provacha Bhagavan Shakunanam Vicheshtitam. Shakunanam. So Shakuni means bird. Shakunam means Shakuna Shastram, where there is a nimittam. Something happens in nature by which we predict something. So it goes into the range of Phalitha Jyotisham, which comes later. So Shakunanam Vicheshtitam. But here what he says is, if a particular bird, but in Brihat Samhita we don't necessarily find that it is only a bird, it could be any creature. So imagine that there is horizon around us. In Brihat Samhita, what he does is, he divides the whole circle into 32 different parts. We can divide it into 4, 8, 16, etc. He divides it into 32 different corners. Then if you listen some sound from, say, this 31st corner, then something will happen. If you listen to a cry of a bird or some creature from the 8th corner, then something will happen. You will meet some person or you will be successful in some activity. These kinds of predictions are given in Antara Chakradhyaya in Brihat Samhita. Here probably it has more to do with lesser number of directions as well as birds cry, and based on that some prediction. So this Antara Chakram, at least there seems to have been a development in the Antara Chakram, because here at least he says Shakunanam Vicheshtitam, but still here also he mentions various directions and different directions from which if you listen to sounds, then what is the prediction that you have to do. Samanyanam Narendranam Aindri Dik. It is also interesting that different Varnas are assigned different directions. So Narendra, some Raja or any Raja for example, Aindri Dik is east. Agneyi Sarva Shilpanam Tatha Yecha Agni Jivinaha. So Agni Jivinaha could be, as I said before, Lohakaraha. It could be someone who is doing smithi, etc. Agneya Dik. Obviously they work with Agni. So Agneya Dik is for them. Yamya is southern. Usually it goes in the clockwise direction. Pradakshinam. We need not use words like ghatitaha, etc. Ghati is clock. So people try to use for clockwise ghatitaha. That isn't needed. We already have a very nice word, pradakshinam. Anti-clockwise is apradakshinam. So whenever the directions are enumerated, even if you don't know the dikpalakaha, for instance, Indraha, Agnihi, Yamaha, Nirritihi, Varunaha, Vayuhu, etc. It comes around like this. Either Soma or Kubera for north, Ishana for northeast. Even if it is not very familiar, usually the trick to understand it is clockwise. So they will start from east, then go to southeast, then south, then southwest, then west, like this. In any of the ancient texts, in many texts at least, I found that to be the case. Here also, Raja is assigned east, then some of these Agni Jivinaha, metal working people, they are assigned Agneya Dik, southeast. Then Mahamatraha, they are assigned south. Mahamatra is any big minister, not necessarily only the main minister. Then Nirriti, southwest, is assigned to some people. Lekha Hantaro, probably someone who is a scribe or who is a messenger. This is also assigned, and probably these kinds of directions also played important role while predicting something for these particular people. If that person listens something in that direction, maybe that will strengthen him. Some of this from Vedāṅgajyotiṣam is yet to be edited. So I am giving a reading directly from the manuscripts. Only the first reading. But lot of it is still to be figured out. So this is what we have gleaned from whatever is transcribed till now. But this seems to be a part of Samhita texts in Brihat Samhita and later texts. One more example I would like to give is Shvachakram. This is also quite interesting. What is Shwa? Shwa means Shunakaha, dog. From the activities of a dog, you can predict something. Amisham tu yada grihya shvapi dware pravishyate annapanasya labhaya. So if the dog is carrying a piece of mamsa in its mouth, and it comes near the house entrance or near the house, then you can be assured that annapanasya labhaya, you will get good food, etc. Chailam grihya, so grihya is arsha prayoga, usually use grihitva, is if it carries a piece of cloth from somewhere in its mouth and it is running, utpatam tadrisham drishtva vastralabham vinirdishet. So it is not daily happening that it is carrying a cloth. So utpata is some kind of a weird activity, something peculiar. So if it is that, then vastralabham, so you may gain vastram, you may gain new cloth. etc. So like this, from the activities of the dog, what it does, something very strange, etc., you can predict what the person looking at it wants to predict. So someone who is looking at it may ask for a prediction to the Samvatsarika or the Jyotishi. Then with the help of this Shastram and his understanding, he will explain this. So this is Shvachakram. Then Vastu Vidya. Vastu Vidya is something which we may find out of place. Why is Vastu Vidya in Jyotisha Shastram? But if we inquire a little bit more into Vastu Vidya, then the first thing that we want, of course, is Bhumi Pariksha. But when you start laying the foundation, east-west direction determination is very important. How do you do east-west determination? For that, you need Jyotisha Jnanam. There are often ways, different ways, from Nakshatra, from Suryodaya, Suryastamanam, various kinds of observations. Other observations are also there in other texts. For example, the gradation of plants from south to north, they become more coarse, etc. There are these kinds of observations through which you determine north-south, from which east-west can be determined, or directly east-west can be determined through Shanku, etc. So Vastu Vidya, Vastu is essentially engineering, civil engineering and architecture, and that forms a part of Jyotisham because Jyotisham doesn't mean a narrow discipline of only astronomy and astrology when it comes to Vedāṅgajyotiṣam, but it comes to a compilation of all natural sciences, all things that they wanted, they required to live in a village or a city during that time, say 2500, 3000 years ago. So Vastu Vidya is also an important part of this. Now, Vastu Vidya has a lot more. There are 6-7 chapters in it. And then there are many other Angas like Anga Vidya, Swati Yogaha, Mahasalilam, which is a huge question and answer prakaranam. And Mahasalilam goes into most fundamental questions that they were asking. And the next chapter answers those questions according to their own knowledge, whatever they could gather during that. But due to lack of time, we will stop here, but we will come back for the next part. If in case you haven't subscribed to the Atharva Forum, please subscribe to Atharva Forum. We will continue the rest of the Angas, at least some of the important Angas, and see what they contain and how they enriched our tradition and how we might have lost that spirit of scientific inquiry.